Captain Sarah Okonkwo had made 47 jumps in her career as a deep space freighter captain, and every single one of them had felt wrong. Not dangerous, exactly. The jump drives worked perfectly. The math checked out. Humanity had been using faster-than-light travel for 23 years now, and the technology was considered safe, reliable, even routine. But something about the experience itself, the moment when her ship, the Iron Promise, slipped between normal space and whatever lay beyond, always made Sarah's skin crawl. It was the silence, mostly. When a ship engaged its jump drive, there was a moment, just a fraction of a second, really, when all sound ceased. Not just the hum of the engines or the whisper of the life support systems, but everything. Your heartbeat. Your breathing. The blood moving through your veins. For that instant, you existed in absolute, perfect silence. And in that silence, Sarah always felt like something was listening. She'd mentioned it once to her crew, early in her career. Her engineer, Marcus, had laughed it off. It's just the physics, capital. We're passing through a different dimension. Different rules. Different properties. Your brain gets confused for a second, that's all. But Marcus didn't feel it the way Sarah did. None of them did. She was thinking about this as she reviewed the jump calculations for their next route. The Iron Promise was hauling medical supplies from Earth to the colony on Kepler for 42b, a 14-day journey with 3 jumps required. Standard run. Good pay. Nothing unusual. Except for the new directive that had come through that morning. Sarah pulled up the message again, frowning at the screen. Priority alert. All registered vessels effective immediately. Revised jump protocols. New safety guidelines require minimum 48-hour intervals between consecutive jumps. Violation of this protocol may result in license suspension and criminal charges. Further details classified. Compliance mandatory. United Earth Space Authority. 48 hours. Marcus said when she showed him. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and the perpetually oil-stained hands of someone who'd spent 30 years working on ship engines. Cap, that's insane. That'll add weeks to every long-haul route. The shipping companies will go bankrupt. I know, Sarah said. But it's not a suggestion. It's an order. Did they say why? Classified. Marcus snorted. Of course it is. Bureaucrats probably just want to justify their paychecks by creating new regulations. But Sarah wasn't so sure. She'd been captaining ships for 15 years, and she'd never seen the Space Authority issue a directive like this. Not without explanation. Not with criminal penalties attached. Something had happened. Something bad enough that they were willing to cripple the entire interstellar shipping industry to prevent it from happening again. She needed to know what. The answer came 3 days later, in the most unexpected way possible. Sarah was in her quarters, reviewing supply manifests, when her comm chimed. It was Yuki Chen, her navigator, a young woman, brilliant with numbers, who'd graduated top of her class from the Lunar Academy. Captain, you need to see this, Yuki said. Her voice was strange. Tight. I'm forwarding you a file. I don't know what it is, actually. But you need to see it. The file was marked with about a dozen security warnings. Classified. Restricted. For official use only. Sarah's pulse quickened as she opened it. It was a report. A scientific analysis from the Jump Drive Research Institute, dated 2 weeks ago. The title made her stomach drop. Preliminary findings, anomalous activity in subspace during FTL transit. Sarah read quickly, her hands growing cold. According to the report, researchers had finally managed to capture detailed sensor data from inside the between space the dimension ships passed through during FTL jumps. What they'd found had terrified them. The dimension wasn't empty. There was something in there. Something massive. The sensors had detected a presence. An entity. The report used careful, scientific language, but Sarah could read between the lines. The researchers were scared. Deeply, fundamentally scared. And worse, the data suggested that each time a ship made a jump, the presence reacted. Slightly. Minutely. Like something stirring in its sleep. The report's conclusion was stark. If current trends continue, cumulative jump activity may trigger a full awakening event. Consequences unknown but potentially catastrophic. Immediate reduction in jump frequency strongly recommended. Sarah sat back, her mind racing. Humanity had been punching holes through a dimension inhabited by something vast and sleeping. Every jump was like shouting in a library, hoping not to wake the person sleeping in the corner. And they'd been doing it thousands of times a day, for 23 years. How did you get this? Sarah asked when she called Yuki back. The navigator looked uncomfortable. My girlfriend works at the institute. She sent it to me. She's scared, Captain. The researchers are all scared. The government is trying to keep this quiet, but the word is leaking out. People are starting to ask questions. What kind of questions? The kind that end with what happens if we wake it up. Sarah didn't have an answer for that. Neither, apparently, did anyone else. The new protocol changed everything. With 48 hours required between jumps, routes that used to take days now took weeks. Shipping costs skyrocketed. Colony supply lines stretched thin. The economic impact was immediate and brutal. And people were angry. Sarah watched the news feeds from her quarters. Protests on Earth. Shipping companies threatening lawsuits. Politicians demanding answers from the Space Authority, who refused to explain the new regulations beyond vague references to safety concerns. But some captains weren't waiting for explanations. Some were ignoring the protocol entirely. They can't enforce it, one captain argued on a public forum. They don't have enough patrol ships to monitor every route. I've got 3 kids on Earth and a mortgage. I can't afford to add weeks to every run. I'm making my jumps on schedule, and they can fine me if they want. Others agreed. Within days, dozens of captains had publicly announced they were violating the protocol. Some out of economic necessity. Some out of principle. Some because they simply didn't believe the threat was real. Sarah understood the temptation. The Iron Promise was already behind schedule. Her cargo of medical supplies was desperately needed on Kepler for 42b, where a bacterial outbreak was spreading through the colony. Every day of delay meant more people getting sick. Maybe dying. But she also remembered that feeling. That moment of absolute silence during a jump, and the sense that something vast and incomprehensible was aware of her passage through its domain. Marcus found her on the bridge, staring at the navigation charts. We could make up time, he said quietly. 1 extra jump. We'd only need to wait 30 hours instead of 48. Probably wouldn't make a difference. Probably, Sarah echoed. The medical supplies, capital. People are dying. I know. So what are we going to do? Sarah looked at the route plotted on her screen. 3 jumps. 48 hours between each one. They'd arrive at Kepler for 42b in 16 days. But if she cut the wait time in half, they could make it in 11. 5 days. Maybe 50 lives, if the outbreak was as bad as the report suggested. Against what? An unconfirmed threat? Data from sensors that might be malfunctioning? A presence that might not even be real? We follow the protocol, Sarah said finally. Marcus's jaw tightened. Even if people die because of it. Even then. Because if the protocol is right, and we wake that thing up, a lot more people than 50 are going to die. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. 2 days after Sarah's decision, another ship, the Stellar Wind, a commercial hauler under Captain James Reeves, made headlines by completing a record-breaking run from Mars to Tau Ceti. 6 jumps in 8 days. A direct, flagrant violation of the protocol. Captain Reeves became an instant celebrity. He gave interviews, talking about how the new regulations were strangling commerce and how his successful run proved the rules were unnecessary. I made 6 jumps, and nothing happened, he said on every news channel. The universe didn't end. This whole thing is a scam designed to give bureaucrats more control over independent captains. Public opinion shifted. More captains started violating the protocol. The Space Authority tried to crack down, but Reeves was right, they didn't have the resources to enforce it. Fines were issued but largely ignored. The 48-hour rule became more of a suggestion than a law. And for a while, it seemed like Reeves had been right. Nothing happened. Ships jumped on tight schedules. Supply lines normalized. The economy stabilized. The protests died down. Life continued. Sarah kept following the protocol anyway. Her crew grumbled about it. Other captains mocked her on the forums. Captain Cautious, they called her. Better safe than sorry, Sarah. She endured it. Because she remembered that silence. That presence. That feeling of something vast stirring in dimensions humans were never meant to touch. And because she'd read the full classified report, not just the summary Yuki had shown her, but the complete analysis that her girlfriend had eventually leaked to the public. The report had included something the summary hadn't mentioned. A prediction. Based on their models, the researchers estimated that if jump frequency continued at current levels, there was a 73% chance of a full awakening event within the next 5 years. But if humanity reduced jump frequency by half, essentially following the 48-hour protocol, they could push that probability down to less than 5%. The math was theoretical, of course. Based on data they barely understood, measuring something they couldn't really perceive. But the researchers had been confident enough to stake their careers on it. That had to mean something. It happened on a Tuesday. Sarah was 3 days into a routine cargo run when the distress call came through. She was on the bridge with Yuki, reviewing their next jump coordinates, when every emergency channel suddenly lit up at once. Multiple vessels reporting. Something wrong with the jump space. Can't complete the transition. Stuck in between. Oh God, it's moving. The cacophony of panicked voices flooded the bridge. Sarah's blood ran cold as she pulled up the navigation network, trying to make sense of what was happening. Dozens of ships, maybe hundreds, had attempted jumps in the last hour. It was peak transit time, when commercial traffic was heaviest. Normal, routine operations. Except this time, something had gone wrong. Ships were getting stuck in the transition. Caught halfway between normal space and the jump dimension, unable to complete their passage. And those ships were reporting something. Sarah pulled up one of the emergency transmissions. It was from a passenger liner, the Olympus Dawn, carrying 3,000 people. The captain's voice was barely controlled panic. This is Captain Rodriguez of the Olympus Dawn requesting immediate assistance. We initiated jump sequence 7 minutes ago and haven't completed transition. We're still in the between space. And there's something here with us. I can't, it's too big to, we need help. Please. Anyone. There's something here, and it's waking up. The transmission cut off. Sarah tried to raise them again. Nothing. Just static. Captain, Yuki said, her voice shaking. I'm showing 47 ships stuck in transition. 47. And the number's growing. Marcus burst onto the bridge. Cap, you seeing this? Every ship that jumped in the last hour is stuck. They're trapped in there with, he stopped, his face pale. Is this what the protocol was trying to prevent? Sarah didn't answer. She was too busy pulling up the classified research data, cross-referencing it with the current crisis. The numbers made her sick. The researchers had been tracking cumulative jump activity, measuring the entity's response to each passage through its domain. For 23 years, humanity had been making thousands of jumps per day. And each one had caused a tiny reaction. A slight stirring. Like drops of water falling on someone who's sleeping. At first, they don't notice. They might twitch slightly, shift position. But eventually, enough drops fall, and they wake up. Humanity had just let the last drop fall. We need to stop all jumps, Sarah said. Immediately. Send out a priority alert to every ship in our network. No one is to engage jump drives until further notice. On what authority? Marcus asked. Mine. And hope to God someone listens. They did listen. Mostly because the alternative was watching more ships disappear into that space between spaces, where something vast and incomprehensible was stirring from its ancient sleep. The Space Authority officially suspended all FTL travel within an hour. Humanity's interstellar civilization ground to a halt. Sarah spent the next 72 hours glued to her monitors, following the crisis as it unfolded. The trapped ships were still out there, stuck in that impossible dimension. Search and rescue operations were impossible, no one could reach them without risking the same fate. But some of the ships were still transmitting. Audio only. No video, cameras didn't work properly in that space. But the audio that came through was enough to fuel nightmares for years to come. Captain Rodriguez of the Olympus Dawn kept broadcasting for 16 hours before her transmission cut off. Her last message was burned into Sarah's memory. It's not hostile. I don't think it even knows we exist. We're like bacteria to it. Microscopic. But it's moving now. Shifting. And ships are being crushed in the movement. Not destroyed. Just compressed. Folded into dimensions we don't have names for. I can hear my passengers screaming, but I can't help them. I can't. Static. 17 ships made it out. They emerged back into normal space damaged, their crews traumatized but alive. They reported the same thing Rodriguez had, something enormous moving through that space, vast beyond human comprehension, indifferent to the tiny vessels caught in its awakening. 53 ships were lost. Total casualties, over 8,000 people. The Olympus Dawn was never recovered. In the weeks that followed, humanity faced a choice it had never imagined it would have to make. Keep using FTL travel, and risk waking the entity fully. Or give it up. Go back to slower-than-light travel. Accept that the stars were further apart than humanity had dared to hope. The debate raged across every platform, every channel, every government. Some argued that the entity, whatever it was, could be studied, understood, maybe even negotiated with. Others wanted to weaponize it, find a way to control it. Still others insisted it had been a fluke, a one-time event that wouldn't happen again if they were more careful. But the researchers who'd first discovered the presence had new data now. Better data. Data that came at a terrible cost. Their conclusion was unanimous: the entity was awake. Not fully conscious, perhaps, but aware in a way it hadn't been before. And any further jump activity, any at all, risked pushing it into full wakefulness. And they had no idea what would happen if it woke up completely. The best-case scenario was that it would simply exist alongside humanity, vast and indifferent. The worst-case scenario involved terms like dimensional collapse and cascade failure of space-time integrity and extinction-level event. No one wanted to test which scenario was correct. The vote came down from the United Earth Congress 2 months after the awakening event. It was close, closer than Sarah had expected, but the decision was made. The silence protocol became official policy. FTL travel was suspended indefinitely. All jump drives were to be decommissioned and placed in secure storage. Humanity would return to subliminal travel, using conventional rocket technology to move between the stars. It would take decades instead of days to reach even the nearest colonies. The interstellar age had lasted 23 years. Now it was over. Sarah was in her quarters when the decommission order came through for the Iron Promise. She'd known it was coming, but that didn't make it easier to read. Her ship, her home for 15 years, would be retrofitted with a conventional drive system. The jump drive that had carried her across light years in mere seconds would be removed, locked away, forbidden. She thought about protesting, about arguing that there had to be another way. But she remembered Captain Rodriguez's last transmission. The sound of 3,000 people dying in a space humans were never meant to enter. Marcus found her staring out the viewport at Earth below. "They're calling it the long peace," he said quietly. "The new age of slow travel." Making it sound noble instead of like a massive step backward. "Maybe it is noble," Sarah said. "Maybe sometimes the brave thing isn't pushing forward. It's knowing when to stop." "You really believe that?" "I don't know. Ask me in 50 years, when we're still crawling between the stars at a fraction of light speed, and half the colonies have died because we can't supply them fast enough." "That's bleak, capital." "Yeah. But it's better than waking something that could destroy us all." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Then, you ever wonder what it is?" "The thing in that space." Sarah had wondered. She'd spent countless hours reading the scientific analyses, the philosophical debates, the religious interpretations. Everyone had theories. An alien entity. A cosmic predator. A god. The universe itself, given form and consciousness. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying: they didn't know. They would probably never know. Humanity had stumbled into a dimension inhabited by something so far beyond human comprehension that even calling it a thing was probably incorrect. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that we found something we weren't meant to find. And we're lucky it didn't wake up fully. We're lucky it only crushed 53 ships instead of reaching through into our dimension and erasing us from existence." "You think it could do that?" "I think we're bacteria, Marcus. And it's sleeping. And the smartest thing bacteria can do when they're living on a sleeping giant is keep very, very quiet." 20 years passed. The colony survived, though it was difficult. Slower supply lines meant rationing. Careful planning. A return to self-sufficiency that the early pioneers had embraced but that later generations had forgotten. Some colonies failed. Others thrived. Humanity adapted, as it always had. Captain Sarah Okonkwo retired at 63, her last voyage a 6-month crawl from Earth to Mars on conventional engines. She settled in a small town in Kenya, where she could watch the stars at night and remember when reaching them had been easy. She followed the news still. The ongoing debates about the silence protocol. The fringe groups who argued for resuming FTL travel, who claimed the danger had been exaggerated. The new generation of scientists working on alternative methods, quantum tunneling, wormhole generation, anything that didn't involve passing through that forbidden dimension. Nothing had worked yet. But humanity kept trying. Sarah was in her garden when the message arrived. It was from the Jump Drive Research Institute, marked with security headers she hadn't seen in years. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was a sensor report. Automated systems still monitored that space between spaces, watching for any sign of activity. Any indication that the entity might be stirring again. The report was brief. Long-term monitoring update. No anomalous activity detected in jump space for past 7,300 days. Entity appears to have returned to dormant state. Preliminary assessment. Silence protocol appears successful. Continued vigilance recommended. Sarah read it 3 times, then sat back in her chair, looking up at the stars. They'd done it. Humanity had made the hardest choice imaginable, giving up the ability to reach the stars quickly, and it had worked. The entity had gone back to sleep. But for how long? Forever, perhaps. Or maybe just until humanity forgot the lesson and started making noise again. Until a new generation, born after the awakening, decided the old fears were superstitious. Until someone convinced themselves that the danger had been exaggerated. Until the first drop of water fell again on something that should never have been disturbed. Sarah closed the message and went back to her garden. But that night, she dreamed of silence. Perfect, absolute silence. The kind of silence that existed between heartbeats, between thoughts, between stars. The kind of silence that wasn't empty at all, but filled with something vast and sleeping. And in her dream, she hoped, prayed, that humanity would have the wisdom to keep it that way. Dr. James Park stood before the United Earth Congress, his presentation hovering in the air before him. He was young, barely 30, and brilliant. The kind of scientist who believed every problem had a solution if you were smart enough to find it. Members of Congress, he said, his voice confident, I'm here to propose we lift the silence protocol. Murmurs ran through the chamber. Sarah Okonkwo, now 75 and serving as a civilian advisor to the Space Committee, felt her stomach tighten. 20 years is long enough, Park continued. We've developed new jump drive technology. Refined systems. Our models suggest we can make the transition faster, cleaner, with 97% less dimensional disturbance. The entity won't even notice. You can't guarantee that, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Park turned to her. Captain Okonkwo. With respect, your experience is from the old technology. We've made significant advances. Have you passed through that space? Sarah asked. Have you felt what's there? I've reviewed all the data. That's not what I asked. Park hesitated. No. I haven't personally experienced jump transit. But the data clearly shows. The data shows we woke something up 20 years ago, Sarah interrupted. Something we don't understand. Something that killed 8,000 people without even noticing they existed. And now you want to poke it again because you think you can be quieter about it. We can't stay bound to slow travel forever, Park argued. Humanity needs to expand. To grow. We have the technology to reach hundreds of new worlds, but not if it takes us decades to reach each one. We're stagnating because we're too afraid to take a calculated risk. Calculated, Sarah repeated. You've calculated the risk of waking an entity that exists in dimensions we can't perceive, that operates on scales we can't comprehend, that could potentially reach into our universe and end us without even meaning to. The probability of full awakening with a new technology is less than 0.03%. It was 0.001% with the old technology. Until it wasn't. The chamber fell silent. Sarah stood, her joints aching, and walked to the center of the floor. She looked at the Congress members, at Park, at all the young faces who'd never known the terror of those 72 hours when humanity held its breath and waited to see if they'd destroyed themselves. "I'm old," she said. "I won't live to see what happens if you lift the protocol. But I'll tell you this, there are things in this universe bigger than us. Older than us. Things that don't think the way we think, don't exist the way we exist. We found one of them. We disturbed it. And we got very, very lucky that it went back to sleep." She paused, meeting Park's eyes. "You want to disturb it again? Fine. But understand what you're risking. You're not just gambling with your own life, or even with Earth's survival. You're gambling with every human being across every colony on every world. You're making a bet that says your calculations are right, that your technology is good enough, that you understand something that by definition cannot be understood. And maybe you'll win that bet. Maybe you'll make your jump, and nothing will happen. Maybe you'll make 1,000 jumps, 10,000, 1,000,000. Maybe it'll work perfectly." Sarah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Or maybe on that first jump, or the 100th, or the 1,000,000th, you'll wake it up. And this time, it won't go back to sleep. This time, it'll open its eyes and actually look at what's been crawling through its domain. And then we'll find out what happens when something vast and incomprehensible decides to pay attention to bacteria." She sat down. The vote was scheduled for the following week. Sarah didn't know which way it would go. She hoped, she prayed, that humanity had learned its lesson. That fear could be wisdom, and caution could be courage. But she was old enough to know that every generation had to learn its own lessons. And that some lessons could only be taught once. Because the second time, there might not be anyone left to remember. Outside the Congress building, Sarah stood and looked up at the stars. They were beautiful tonight. Distant and cold and perfect. And somewhere between them, in a space humans had no name for, something vast and ancient slept. Sarah hoped, with everything she had, that it would sleep forever. But she knew, deep in her bones, that silence was fragile. And humanity had never been good at staying quiet for long.